Hello and welcome to another episode of the Opus Well Style Podcast. My name is Iván Watanabe here with my partner Evan. Evan, good morning. How you doing, man?
Morning. Feeling well rested and high energy. I'm excited for this one.
Good to see your face. I love that. Yeah, that's one of the two of us is feeling high energy and
my kids are a little older. That's
well rested. Yeah, that might be it. I'll have to. I'm really gonna muster through today, but I'm super excited for our guest Jorge Aguilar. Jorge, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning, fellas. Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me on Wealth Style Podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us, man. Jorge and Joanna went to med school together, and so we've known each other for quite some time, and I got to see your sort of career develop and your expertise develop. So, when we were looking for podcast guests in specific, coming off the heels of our conversation with Jeremy Zoll, the GM of the Twins, a couple months back, we wanted to have somebody on in your space, and what better fit. So we're really excited to have you on.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Super excited. So for the audience, Dr. Aguilar is a board-certified psychiatrist providing mental performance training and talk therapy to collegiate, Olympic, professional athletes, working with the NYCFC and Major League Soccer, consulting Major League Baseball. Just like what a true expert, and we're super excited to have you on.
Pumped to be here, Iván. Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
You got some good seats to all these sporting events, I assume?
Yeah. Sometimes I don't even get a seat. I got to stand at the sideline.
All right. That sounds miserable.
Yeah.
If you want somebody to fill in for you, let me know. I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to. So we're excited to have you on today. Again, we just want to kind of talk a little bit about the cross section of sports and the corporate world and the things that are that you're working through with professional athletes, and maybe how that could tie into just the normal folks like us that aren't professional athletes, right, but that sort of dedicate our lives in a corporate or working space, and maybe there's some similarities, and just kind of want to walk through that today. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. Before we start, anything else that you want to kind of add, or anything about yourself that you want to make sure the listening audience kind of finds out?
So I'm a sports psychiatrist. I help athletes with their mental health and also their mental performance, and I take pride in working almost entirely with athletes, but occasionally I make the exception and I work with an executive in law, business, or entertainment, just because so many of these sports psychology principles are applicable outside of sport, not just in our works but in our lives, and oftentimes it's difficult to tease apart mental health issues from mental performance issues. And so if I can help with both sides of the ball there for any human being, an athlete or a non-athlete, that's an exciting thing for me.
I love it. Well, that's why we're here, is trying to get a little bit of an edge on mental performance for me and Iván and all of our generous listeners. So what are some things that translate really well from the sports performance to mental performance, maybe in the business or professional setting? Whether it's trying to get out of a slump or maintain motivation, if you're find yourself with some negative self-talk, like what are some of the key indicators of how you can kind of maintain that performance or high level of performance and see some growth personally?
Great question, Iván. I feel that the contributing reason for any of these things can be so broad. Yeah. And so it really depends on the athlete. And even for that athlete, it can depend on the part of their game or the part of their career that they find themselves in. And so it'd be really difficult to give you a one-size-fits-all here.
Yeah.
Except maybe having the humility and the courage to say to yourself and to others that I might be wrong, that there may be a different way to go about this that I haven't explored yet, and I could use the help. oftentimes elite athletes have a hard time asking for help because they're afraid that it'll be perceived as weakness. And you know, in my opinion, quite the contrary. Asking for help is actually a sign of strength. It shows that you're willing to do anything to get better, even if that means getting a little bit embarrassed along the way.
Do you think that high performers in the sports world are just much better at avoiding negative self-talk, or they're just as akin to it as anyone in the professional setting, or less than elite athletes?
Yeah, when I hear you say negative self-talk, I assume you mean doubts,
Yeah,
thoughts like will I fail? Am I good enough? Will I ever be good enough? And if that's what you mean, then I don't think anyone is capable of keeping such thoughts out of their head effectively, at least in a sustainable way in the long term. I think the most effective way to go about unhelpful thoughts like those, doubts, insecurities, is developing a new relationship with them. So instead of, say, ignoring them, arguing with them, debating with them, instead creating space for them, seeing them for what they are, which is just thoughts, and my mind creates unhelpful random thoughts round the clock. And if it's not helpful to me, can I just let it be right there without getting caught up in it? Am I willing to just have that be background noise so that I can focus on the task at hand?
Is that something that you see often, or is like a constant within the athletes that you're working with around, especially in today's social media world, right? And they're, when you're in the corporate space, you're not being judged all the time from every single direction. You're a professional athlete. You're getting criticized by every single person that's out there that's following that particular game or sport, or so is that something that you have to work with them on to sort of either tune it out, avoid it, or how do they deal with it?
Yeah, I think I see it more often in the younger professional athlete, the rookie, who perhaps saw a tremendous amount of success on their road to being here now at the big show. And so now for the first time, they're really struggling, right? For the first time, they're surrounded by people that are probably better than them. And so those insecurities and doubts become louder. And for the first time, they're really struggling with them. And so what I find myself often having to do with a young athlete that's struggling with doubts is myth busting. Often a young rookie will have this ill-conceived notion that they must have positive thoughts at all times, that they must be positive at all times. And then when that moment comes and that unhelpful, quote-unquote, negative thought comes into their mind that they couldn't stop, because who can, right? Where's the off button for that? They're almost like a deer caught in headlights. What do I do here? And it's not their fault, because this is what they've been hearing their whole lives, right? From coaches, parents, teammates, social media, tons of people who meant well, but unfortunately, they were never told how to keep these quote unquote negative thoughts out of their head, and that's because there is no way to keep those negative thoughts right. And if anything, when they pop up, if we get into the belief that we can make them go away, that we can stop thinking these things, it kind of makes it worse.
Yeah,
right?
Because they're never going to go away, right? So they're just, they're constantly popping up. You don't have any control over whether or not they're popping up. So yeah, I mean that it probably it creates a sort of cycle of helplessness if you're really not able to get rid of them, right? Because it just, again, they're always popping up.
Yeah, Evan, what's your favorite food?
Brownies.
Do not think about a chocolate brownie fresh out of the oven and how warm and soft it'll be to put your teeth into. Stop, don't do it.
Just thinking about my favorite one right now.
Exactly. I mean, it's interesting because I feel like it's sort of self-doubt comes with high performers. I also find it sort of in the space of these days with people applying for new jobs, right? Exploring new opportunities. Like self-doubt is really creating in this market where I'm not happy where I'm working and I'm really trying to find a new opportunity, and can I do it? And I really want to apply for this job. I think I'd be a great fit, but does my resume say that same thing? Or there's just so many different versions of this sort of imposter syndrome or self-doubt, and however it's packaged these days in the corporate space that I think people are really challenged with. I have that conversation all the time. Well, I'd love to apply for this job, but might not be a great fit because my resume says this, but I know I could do it. Are you seeing any of that with your clients, Jorge?
Yeah. I think it's important to normalize this imposter syndrome, this insecurity. We all have it. I've never met an elite athlete that didn't have insecurities pop up. They might not talk about it to the media because they don't want their opponents to know these things. They don't want their coaches to know these things, but they definitely have doubts and insecurities. And so the question is not, how do we make them go away? Should we have them? It's what do we do with them when they pop up? Can I do what I have to do, even though my mind is telling me that it has its concerns? And so it reminds me. It reminds me of what Nolan Ryan once said. You guys are baseball fans?
I am.
Do you know Nolan Ryan, the Nolan Ryan Express back in the the day? He was a pitcher for the Texas Rangers and the Mets. He's one of the first few pitchers to throw over 100 miles per hour, and he would say that a pitcher just has two jobs: pitch selection and pitch execution. That's it. I pick what I'm throwing, where I'm throwing it, and how I throw it. But once that ball is no longer in contact with my fingertips, what happens to that ball is out of my control. It's between God and the batter. And in that same way, going into a job interview or an audition, the only thing that's within your control is your preparation for that meeting and what you do once you're in there. And then you can just walk away, because whether you get it or not, whether you succeed or not, as determined by somebody else, is so out of your control that it's really not worth your energy and attention. Mm-hmm. And there's power in that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so good to hear that. I always think of Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods in his prime, and I think I and most people would think they don't have negative thoughts, they don't have imposter syndrome, and maybe that was true for them, like the elite few. I still don't know, but I'm sure they still have their moments, and they react to it differently and behave differently. But there was I was actually watching golf recently with my son, and it was the Masters, and my son was 6 years old, was asking if he was nervous. Rory McIlroy coming down the finish of the Masters. Mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, heck yeah, he's nervous. He's definitely nervous. He doesn't look nervous, right? You can't tell. But in golf, I don't know if they do this in other sports, but some of the guys will wear a Whoop bracelet, and you'll actually see their heartbeat. Like their heartbeat on the last hole of the tournament. Justin Thomas has happened to him a couple weeks ago, and his heartbeat was like 123 on the final hole, and he looked perfectly normal. He made the putt, but like his heart was pumping out of his chest. And you just can't see it. You just like, you just look at them, their hands aren't shaking, and made the putt perfectly in the center of the hole. And it's just, it's hard to fathom that those guys perform at such a high level, still don't experience that, or still experience, super high anxiety and, nervousness and doubt in times like that. It's a nice thing to see, to kind of normalize it, like you said.
Yeah, great point, Evan. And it's not our fault, right? The world has been telling us when we tune into these games, and we hear the broadcasters say this player has ice water running through their veins, they're cool as ice, right? And they certainly look that way on screen or in person if you're at the game. But I'm telling you, they are scared. They are nervous. I'm with them when they're puking before the game. I'm with them when they're puking at halftime. They're nervous. So when we hear folks say that you have to, have no doubts and be completely confident. What does confidence even mean? We can get into that. These announcers don't really know what they're talking about. They're not in that player's body. They don't know what they're experiencing internally. But what they do know is how to sell a game, how to make it really exciting to listen to and watch. And stories like this sell games, sell athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there, for super elite athletes, it seems like they have the ability, and again, maybe this is fallacy, but from the outside, just seeing how calm they are, to almost kind of compartmentalize some of the stress or anxiety to be able to kind of move past it and still perform, right, at a very high level. So whatever they do with those feelings or energy, in order to continue to move past it, do you think that's a trait that is, and maybe I'm wrong, so please correct me if you think that statement's incorrect, but do you think athletes are, what makes them unique is the ability to push past it? And is that something they're born with, or do you think it's something that you can work on and sort of hone over time? I'm just curious, how that would apply also to sort of, again, the corporate environment. I think about sales folks and how that would, work for them.
Great question, Iván. It's both, right? Some people have a little bit of that extra stuff, and it's also teachable, trainable, improvable. Hearing your question reminds me of firefighters. A couple of years ago, I got to work with the FDNY football team for their derby match against NYPD, and something that they'll tell you is that when they're about to enter a burning building, right, and there's death all around them potentially, and their nerves are going through the roof, that they're trained to not rise to the occasion the way perhaps we hear watching sporting events on TV. Instead, they're trained to fall back to their training. You're only as good as your fallback level of training, right? When your mind is going crazy, telling you 1,000 different ways this can go wrong, what do you fall back to at that point? This is what I do every time, A, B, C. These are my safety measures. I take a deep breath. I bring myself to the moment.
That's really, really interesting.
How much do you think daily habits, whether it's meditation or, good sleep or nutrition, plays a role into their ability to normalize these thoughts and kind of get past them? Awesome
question, Evan. Yeah, if you're not treating your body well, the mind-body connection is real. If you're not sleeping well, feeling your body well, your mind is just not it's going to be less happy. It's going to be more opinionated. And many of those opinions will not be very helpful.
Good way to put it, opinionated.
That said, if you can keep your mind and body well nourished and at a baseline level of opinion, then one thing one can do to kind of loosen the grip of the mind's unhelpful thoughts and suggestions for you in inopportune moments is this mindfulness stuff that you're referring to. So things like deep breathing, right? Mindfulness doesn't have to be meditation. It can be many things. You can walk mindfully. You can eat mindfully. Just something that helps you focus in the present moment in your five senses, even when your thoughts are telling you to remember to do that, or how come you forgot to do that. You can still bring it back to right here, right now. That's like a muscle in your brain that you can help make bigger. Actually, MRIs, imaging studies show that the part of your brain that facilitates attention and focus actually gets bigger, physically bigger, if you do enough meditation over several months. So it's like a real muscle, and so if you train it in time, when those high pressure moments arise, those thoughts are just less sticky. And they're more like some heckler in the stand that you can hear, but you don't listen to.
Yeah, it's funny. I always have this comment around high performing sales professionals, and I think one of the main differences that I see between clients that are really high performing in the sales space or ones that maybe aren't so well performing is their ability to kind of snap back when something happens, right? So like an elastic band, it's like the ones that are super high performing, like something bad happens, the deal falls through, they're able to snap back faster. The ones that aren't so high performing, that snapback of the elastic band kind of is a hell of a lot slower. I find over time. So just the ability to kind of recover from some of those things, I think they would definitely be, well served to spend some time working that muscle for sure.
Yeah, so much of
you can actually increase in size like a muscle. That's I didn't know that.
Yeah, so much of our success on and off the field, is attributed to grit, right? Resilience, being able to rebound, and if you distill it to its essential ingredient, it's really the ability to diffuse or separate from an unhelpful thought. How is the thought of how could you have messed up? You should have done better. How is that helping you in the moment? And so if it's not helpful, how can I let that go to refocus my attention from that thought to what I have to do right now? Get back on that ball, get back on that sales pitch, the thing that is within my control that can yield an outcome that I want.
One of the things for me that's extremely raw, and I'm like pseudo depressed about it, being a Celtics fan, watching Jason Tatum go down with that lower leg injury last night. Like, forget the Celtics, forget the game, forget the playoffs. Like gutted for him as a professional. Like, just so devastating to see him go down with that injury last night. We don't really know the extent of it yet. What would you be saying to him today? Guy in his mid-20s that is at the top of his game. What would you be saying to him as he wakes up this morning, works through his rehab over the next year, two? What would you say to him?
He's as human as you and I, and when something tragic like this happens, your emotions are going to be a mess. And for anybody to tell somebody whose emotions are in a mess to line them up in a row is asking for the impossible. The only thing one can do in a moment like that is provide the space, the dignity for somebody to experience those things, to feel justified in feeling that way. To validate them. And then once they're ready, and it could be some time, having conversations about the journey ahead and what, when it's all said and done, when Tatum comes back, and he will, when his career's at the end and many years from now, like what does he want to be able to say that this is what he did and this is how he did it? What does he want the theme of this chapter of his life to be about?
So giving the context of sort of what that future story holds, right? Because, it sounds like to me, what's that longer term outlook? And maybe that's something that you're working towards, that might be helpful. Is that kind of where you would go with the conversation?
Yeah. We're really talking about goal setting here. When any athlete is injured, how do I get back? Right? That's the goal. And to be successful in goal setting and goal execution, there's like a process to it. You gotta start with who he is. What are his strengths? What are his weaknesses going into this? It's clear what he wants to get back as soon as possible. And then you gotta start with the why before you get to the how. Mm-hmm. You got to get to that meaning and purpose, that fuel, that gas that's gonna propel this difficult journey going forward of rehabilitation and return. And then you can get to the how. And when it comes to the how, you got to pack that with as many things that are 100% within his control as possible. Right? We talk about SMART goals. In medicine, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time relevant, or time limited. So, here's the checklist of things that I will do, in the week after surgery, in the month after surgery, the year after surgery, and just checking them off until we get there.
Yeah. I mean, the same thing is applicable, as you said, goal setting for any type of professional. If something's going on personally in your life, trying to figure out like what that next step is. But you brought up a great point, which I hadn't thought about, which is sort of the why, right? Why is that particular sales goal important to me? Why is it important for me to get back from this, to recover from this poor health news that I just got? Why is it important to me to do X, Y, and Z? I mean, I think establishing that makes a lot of sense, right? So that the rest of it is tiny bit less painful, or maybe when you're in the middle of it, in the trenches there, that you keep focused. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a ton of sense.
That reminds me of one of my favorite books, Start With Why by Simon Sinek. So I've got to ask: are there any 1, 2, or 3 books that you think speak mostly to your theory or philosophy on these things, on just mental performance?
A few books come to mind, but they're textbooks.
Really?
I wouldn't recommend folks go out and buy a big med school textbook
Now we can just put it into
on psychology or
ChatGPT
psychiatry.
And, tell it to summarize it for us.
Yeah.
But
Podcast for it.
Yeah, we there's a whole field of psychology called motivational interviewing, which developed decades ago in hospital settings, when we realized that folks who were suffering from addictions, where the solution's pretty obvious, right? Just stop doing ABC and your life will get back on track. The how is easy, just stop. And yet we couldn't get people to get back on track. And so we needed to revisit the whiteboard. And what became obvious was that getting at the why early on, helping folks identify their values, the things they want to be about, what they want to live by, the things that they want to be defined by first, will then help them align their behaviors to those values. And that's as effective as one can get at helping somebody change their behavior.
So you're trying to start with the end in mind and future pace, or kind of have them think about their future self and how they want to, whether it's legacy or how they want to be seen in the world.
You'd make a great psychologist, Evan. That's one of the tools in the toolkit. Yeah, that's one of the tools in the toolkit, right? So questions like, What do what do you want to say about yourself 10 years from now, looking back at this moment? What do you want, if you have kids, what do you want your kids to say they saw you do when this was all said and done? Not what you wanted to do, sought to do, but what you did. And how meaningful would that be for you to hear them say that? That's the kind of fuel that really, really helps people change course.
Iván and I brainstormed in the past about we should bring this back up. Using, I don't know if it was AI or some kind of visual thing that had them age so that they could actually see their future selves, hoping that would help make them, that would help them make longer term decisions. Because typically when people are making longer term decisions, it's going to benefit them more versus, kind of shorter term, what's going to benefit me tomorrow kind of thing. But anyway, it was just a conversation. We never did anything with it.
Yeah. No, but I think that Evan and I, we constantly talk about our kids, and I think, it's just definitely a motivating factor for us, definitely our why, but really, it's very much like, it can be very much, us-centric, parent-centric. What can I be doing better? What are the things but in, kind of changing the goal of what would I want them to say this life, this chapter was like, is really interesting. Right? What would I want them to say? Like, did the things that I thought matter actually matter? Right? How can I shape that conversation? Did those vacations matter? Did those, did that, gymnastics? Like, what would I want them to actually say? It's a really interesting outlook, or a really interesting perspective for sure. I love that.
I'm really excited with how this conversation is going, guys. It reminds me of a couple of things. We often hear people say, I die for my kids, right? What parent wouldn't say that? But you don't hear parents enough say, I'm going to live for my kids. I'm going to do that hard stuff so that I can be the best possible provider and role model and caregiver for them. That's the hard stuff, right? And that's where people struggle. I can't change this habit, even though it's going to make me a better parent. And so it reminds me of this Buddhist quote that's over 2,000 years old, that goes something like this: to be loved gives you strength, but to love gives you courage. As a parent, that just hits you right in the chest, because if you've ever been told by your kids that they love you, you feel like Superman.
Yeah.
But when it's time for you as their parent to provide that love that they need, you become Superman. You become courageous. And people often misinterpret what courage is. Thinking of the firefighter, a lot of people conflate courage and being brave with fearless, with having high confidence, no doubts. But in fact, being courageous means there is fear, and you're doing it anyway. It means it hurts, and you're doing it anyway.
Yeah. Jorge, I mean, there's a million ways we could take this conversation. I definitely want to have you back on, because I think there's just so much here. As we kind of just wrap up this particular part of the conversation today, are there any things in particular that you want to make sure the listening audience takes away? Anything in particular that either struck you in our conversation today, that the direction that you didn't think it was going to go in, or something that is particularly meaningful, powerful?
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity, Iván. It's May, which means it's Mental Health Awareness Month. I work with a lot of alpha males, a lot of alpha plus males in sports, right? And I got to tell you, the stigma against seeking mental health support is real, especially for folks who grew up in places, homes, families where mental health services aren't a thing. And that's just so sad, because mental health services aren't just for people who are ill. You don't have to be ill to get stronger. I go to a therapist every week. I don't consider myself ill. I actually believe that 100% of human beings would benefit from having a good therapist in their life who can help them reflect and see, wow, my relationship with these thoughts and emotions of mine that are very human could be even better in a way that could open up new and exciting opportunities in my life, that can improve relationships in my life. And there's no side effects to talk therapy, right? And so if there's anyone out there who's considering, who's been on the fence about finding a good therapist for themselves, I'm just going to go ahead and say, go for it, go all in. It's one of the best decisions you'll ever make. I wish I had started it earlier in my life.
Do you just find someone that you connect with, or is like what should someone be looking for?
Yeah, it's kind of like dating, right? Your gut will just tell you, she's the one. And just because you went on one bad date doesn't mean you stop dating for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
So it might take a couple dates, but they're there.
Amazing. Well, Jorge, listen, we really, really appreciate the time. Again, another really, really valuable conversation. I got a ton of takeaways, and I'm sure the listening audience did too. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, guys.
Appreciate it. And to you, the listening audience, thanks for tuning in. Make sure to click subscribe below to be notified when we release our next episode. Appreciate you guys.